So when it comes to the notion of authenticity, the RZA is like, he's my guy. I heard him in an interview with Rick Rubin, who's a famous producer. And the RZA is the founder and producer. He's also a hip hop MC of a group called Wu-Tang from Long Island that I grew up on. I mean, I remember, being 13 years old, smoking weed in my cousin's bedroom, listening to an album called Liquid Swords. And it was like an alien had landed and delivered an album, from another planet. You're like, who are these guys? And it's because, their hip hop lineage, like where they got their sound from actually wasn't other hip hop artists. They got their sound from Kung Fu movies. And so it was this mix of, hip hop, boom bap drums from the East Coast and these, Kung Fu sounds and these soul samples. It was really amazing. So anyways, I heard this interview with Rick Rubin and the RZA. And basically Rick was like, man, kind of like me, like, hey man, you're like an alien. Like you start making this kind of music at like 15 years old. Like, who are you? Like, how did you create Wu-Tang? And RZA goes, he has this phrase, I'll never forget it. He says in the interview, Rick, I had knowledge of myself at a very young age, like 11 years old. And just the way that he said it, and I'm really familiar with Wu-Tang and the RZA and hip hop, and the way he said, I had knowledge of myself at a very young age. For me, it was like a theory about how human beings develop in a way that I had never thought about it. So I give a lot of credit to the RZA for this, because I think about human development, psychological development. I actually know about stage development in Kohlberg and Piaget, and I know about how humans grow, learn, and transform. I know the great thinkers on the subject, but for me, my favorite right now is the RZA, because there's not a category in developmental psychology that says, when do we get knowledge of self in the way that he's talking about, because he's implying that he knew who he was supposed to be and what he was supposed to be doing at 11 years old. But I think it's so crucial. If I'm raising kids and I have expectations about how they're behaving in the world, but they're also individual and unique souls, one of the things I want to understand is, when does this kid have knowledge of self? Because at that point I have to trust what they're doing. I mean, I don't know if RZA's mom, when he was smoking weed and watching Kung Fu movies, was like, well, he knows himself and he knows exactly what he's supposed to be doing, so let him do his thing. So that the notion of knowledge of self. The other thing that struck me when he said that was, for me, that experience happened much later. I got sober at 21 years old, but if you were to ask me in the way that RZA was implying, or at least my interpretation of what RZA was implying, when I had knowledge of self, I would probably say not till my 30s. It's very interesting. So it's interesting to think about that as a category of being, and it relates to a notion of authenticity. How can you be authentic without having knowledge of self? Without knowing who you are? And I don't mean that in some complete sense. I just mean that in some sense where you wake up and you kind of just know who you are. And you know generally what you're supposed to be doing and how you're supposed to be. It's not some, fancy academic concept, but I think it points to something so important and so real about the human journey and the human soul.